Thank you everyone for joining the webinar today. I'm James Jackson, the Director of Regional Partnerships here at Teach to One, and I'll be your host today. A few housekeeping items before we go into the webinar. Everyone attending today is on listen only mode, so you don't have to worry about turning on or off your cameras and muting yourselves. Please use the chat feature today to ask us any questions. And at the end of the presentation, you will be able to schedule a meeting with us. We'll also send a recording of the webinar after this is over. So without further ado, let's jump right in. So part one of this webinar is we're going to be hearing from Dr. Muri, the superintendent of Ector County ISD, and Joel Rose, the CEO and co-founder of New Classrooms. They'll be talking about addressing learning loss. Part two, we'll have a panel discussion where I'm going to speak with Jennifer Hernandez, Andrea Messick, and Sarah Towler about implementing innovative learning models. And then part three, we'll have an attendee Q&A where you'll be able to chat in questions to all five of our presenters. Over to you, Dr. Muri, to get us started.
Good deal. Thanks, James, and good afternoon, everybody. As James said, my name is Scott Muri. I'm the superintendent of Ector County Independent School District. And to kind of frame this system out, the slide kind of tells you a little bit about who we are. A year ago, pre-pandemic, we were a district that served 34,000 children pre-K through 12th grade. Currently, it's 32,000 students. The pandemic has somehow 2,000 students became missing during this pandemic period of time, as they have become missing across the state of Texas. And we diligently search for those children, and hopefully they'll return to us next year. About 55% of our kids are economically disadvantaged. 77% of our students are Hispanic, 15% white, and 4% African American. We have 43 schools in our district, pre-K, elementary, middle, and high school. A healthy magnet program in our system as well. We believe in choice, so our students and families have choice opportunities throughout the system. And then specifically today, as we talk about Teach to One and the implementation of that program within ECISD, of course, we're focused on our middle school students, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And as you can see by the circle graphs on the right, not all of our students are participating in the Teach to One program. We have it currently in place at 3 of our middle schools, currently serving 6th graders and 7th graders. Next year, we'll roll up to 8th graders at those schools. So about half of our middle school students are participating in the Teach to One model, and then the other half of our students a bit more of a traditional mathematics experience currently in ECISD. So that's a little of who we are demographically. And then as we transition slides and talk about why do we need to think differently about mathematics and literacy and really other areas in ECISD, but specifically mathematics. I've been in this district since July of 2019, and during my first 3 months on the job, I used my ears and my eyes quite a bit just to really absorb and understand the current environment. And I learned pretty quickly, even before the pandemic, that academically, there was a lot of work to do in this organization. We needed to provide more nurturing, more academic rigor, more focus for the children that we were serving. And then as the pandemic came to bear, those academic needs became even greater. And so in working with our board of trustees, we developed a set of goals that are fairly lofty goals, and we established those for the year 2024. But we need to know how we're doing really each year as we build up to that. And so underneath those goals, we developed a set of indicators of success, as we call them. And what you're looking at on the screen now, really some of those indicators of success. And you can see the academic condition that we're in. And these are a few of the measures that we're using organizationally. We're looking at the growth of our students. We use both the STAR and the MAP assessment, the measure of academic progress, to monitor the growth of our students. If you kind of slide halfway over on that chart, you can see where we are today from a growth perspective, and then the goals in 2024, where we would like to be as we grow our students. The next area you'll see specifically 6th grade reading and mathematics, using the STAR as that assessment. And specifically in math, you can see currently only 26% of our students in the area of mathematics in the 6th grade are performing at or above grade level. And so in the state of Texas, that's at the meets level or higher. We'd like to be, by the year 2024, at 47%. And that 47% is not just a random number. That actually is the current state average in Texas. So currently in our state, 47% of 6th graders in the area of mathematics are performing at or above grade level. But in our system, we're at 26%. Our goal is really to be where the rest of you are, the rest of the state of Texas is today by the year 2024. So that's quite a bit of movement and significant work that has to happen on the part of our teachers. And then in 8th grade, you'll see a similar picture. In mathematics specifically, 24% of our students currently, and again, this is 2019 data, represent proficiency in the area of mathematics. But in Texas, we're at 57% proficient. So we have a lot of work to do organizationally just to get our students performing at the same level as students across the state of Texas. And so those data really represent a lot of the why. And we could continue to talk about data elements pre-K through 12th grade, specifically in mathematics. But I think these particular indicators of success help you understand clearly the challenge, the academic challenge that we face as a school system in trying to bring significant growth and development on the part of our students. Then comes a pandemic. And so the next slide begins to paint a much larger picture of not only where our students were, but because of the pandemic, the situation that we're dealing with now. And the situation I'm going to describe using these data would be typical of unfortunately, many classrooms across the state of Texas and even the United States today. What you're looking at in the center, and if you are a mathematician or a math teacher or a former or maybe a recovering math teacher in Texas, you recognize that this information comes from our Texas standards, the TEKS, and the representations and probability. These are threads that run throughout elementary, middle, and high school as our students need to master certain standards as they matriculate through grade levels. This particular slice comes from a 7th grade classroom currently in ECISD. So we looked at our MAP data, the measure of academic progress, at the end of winter. So that second administration, which we did during the month of January. We wanted to know, using that assessment, where exactly our students were. And again, these are 7th grade math students. And if you look at the results, and again, this is from one classroom in our school district, you will see that the group of students that this teacher is serving range from 3rd grade mathematics in this particular content area all the way up to geometry. So this is a group of 25 kids and one teacher, and the students range from 3rd grade really to 10th grade mathematically. And how in the world is one teacher going to address the individual learning needs from a group of children that range from 3rd grade all the way through 10th grade? But that is the current reality for students in ECISD. So we need a solution that helps us address that kind of spread in classrooms. And you know as well as I, this type of scenario is bigger than just the pandemic. While the pandemic has certainly exacerbated these gaps and these learning variances, these have existed for years in our organizations. 10 years ago, a typical 7th grade math classroom had very similar ranges from 3rd grade through 10th grade in one particular classroom. And many times when a teacher is asked to address the needs of those students, they simply teach to the middle. They create one lesson plan and hope that lesson plan meets the needs of the majority of the students in that classroom. But if you look at the spread of this class, one lesson plan or even 2 lesson plans would not adequately meet the needs of the kids in this environment. The best way to meet the needs of these children in this particular classroom is to personalize their instruction. It is to think differently. It is to think about the individual students that are in that particular space and equip our teachers with the skills necessary to personalize down to the individual student level, to understand how you meet those individual needs and to give them the resources to do that. not only the professional development, but the actual tools. And that, for us, that's where Teach to One comes into play. And so TTO, the Teach to One model for ECISD, is an opportunity for teachers, specifically in the area of mathematics in 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade, to meet the very diverse learning needs of students today. And again, the pandemic has created many more opportunities for those learning gaps to be accelerated. In the Teach to One learning environment, our teachers are equipped not only with the knowledge and the expertise of how to meet those individual learning needs, but they have tools with which to do it, leveraging powerful tools of technology, leveraging the mathematical knowledge and expertise of the teacher himself or herself, using a variety of the manipulatives that teachers have access to, but a plethora of resources that teachers can use to individually meet those students' needs. And as you can tell, again, from these data, it's critically important that we do that. So I've known about Teach to One for quite a few years. In fact, the next slide kind of paints a picture. Prior to coming to Ector County ISD several years ago, I worked in Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, a large system of about 150,000 students in the state of North Carolina. And we were, about a decade ago, faced with a very similar challenge. How do you, as an educator, meet these very diverse needs of middle school students when their needs at that point really can range from kindergarten through 1st grade, and yet they're in the 6th grade, all the way up to, calculus, but yet these are middle school students. How do you address those individual learning needs? We heard about a pretty incredible program that personalized the learning experience for children, brought that program to Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, and began to see results for kids. Fast forward to Fulton County Schools. I served there for 3 years as the deputy superintendent for academics. And once again, we were faced with a group of students whose typically in that environment, their learning progress was significantly impacted by the level of poverty that those kids were experiencing, their lack of having a healthy environment outside of school on which to support their learning continuum. And so by the time those students arrived in the middle school level, many of those students were years behind mathematically from where they should be. So once again, thinking about the power of personalization and the power of meeting the individual student learning needs, we also in that system identified a large group of middle schools, equipped those teachers with the skills they needed to be successful in this environment, and then equipped them with the tools of technology, and then actually recreated space. We redesigned the learning environment to help kids and teachers think differently about what mathematics looks like in a healthy environment. And then today, about a year and a half ago, we in the state of Texas leveraged the MIZ grant through the Texas Education Agency and brought to not only 2 schools, but to 3 schools in ECISD this opportunity to personalize learning instruction for individual students through Teach to One mathematics. And it's been a pretty incredible experience. I think the biggest success I would lift up, I'll rewind back to Fulton County. I remember looking at our map data. We are halfway through the year. And we had been implementing Teach to One math from August through December, and our students took the map assessment in early January. And I remember vividly our special education students, so a group of kids whose mathematic capabilities sometimes can be far below what it needs to be, far below grade level. In that environment, our special ed students grew 120% more than their regular ed students. 120% more growth than students that were regular ed. And that kind of powerful result, especially for our most fragile students, was significant. In that same environment, 30% of our economically disadvantaged students, they grew 30% more than students that were non-ED. And then our EL students, 20% more improvement than non-EL students. So across the board, our fragile students, those students that were struggling the most, actually demonstrated the most growth in this environment. And that focus on our most fragile children really helps solidify this powerful opportunity for kids. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joel Rose, who really is the brains behind this pretty incredible opportunity for kids. Joel.
Thank you, Scott. It is a real privilege and pleasure to be working so closely with you and your team. In Ector County, we will talk a little bit about Teach to One, but before we talk about that, I really wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about what we've learned in the last 10 years about acceleration, which hopefully can be useful to you all as we sort of think collectively about how to support schools in addressing learning loss. So to start off where we are, entering 2020, according to a study from NWEA, students were expected to be a full year behind where they otherwise would be in math. And this was pre-pandemic. And let's be honest, that where they would have otherwise been wasn't necessarily on grade level in many schools either. So the question is, we had kids who were already behind, who fell further behind. How do schools and districts begin to systematically address learning loss? Not just to say we're going to schedule a summer school or we're going to get tutors, but to really think strategically and systematically about how to address this challenge. So we want to, for a moment, just think a little bit about math from the time a kid gets past basic numeracy to the time they are through algebra. There are roughly 300 mathematical skills and concepts that they need to learn to get through algebra. Things like multiplying fractions and surface area and adding and subtracting linear equations. And when I say skills, I mean the procedural, the conceptual, and the applied dimensions. But think of those as the total number of chapters in textbooks that range from 5th grade through Algebra 1. And there are a few things to know about these skills. One is that all of them require some level of predecessor or related knowledge. It's really hard to learn about two-step linear equations if you don't know one-step linear equations. So predecessors really matter for acceleration. The second is that each of the skills can be mastered at different levels of depth. There is surface area knowledge, there's much deeper conceptual and applied knowledge. And then finally, each of these skills can kind of fade in and out over students' long-term memory over time. 3 critical dimensions and properties of a specific mathematical skill. Now, if there's one chart I want you to focus on for this entire presentation, it's this one. It won't take but a minute to explain, but I think it really goes to the heart of what it is that we and others are trying to do to support schools and districts trying to address learning loss in a different way. So the way to read this chart is, if you start off on the left, there are roughly 42 skills that a student in Texas will learn in the 4th grade that will appear on the STAR assessment. But to learn those 42 skills, there are 22 predecessor skills, meaning you have to know, for example, how to add before you know how to multiply. So there's really 64. Then in the 5th grade, there are 40 new 5th grade skills. Those 40 build on top of a set of predecessor skills from the 4th grade, so 30 of the 42 4th grade skills, and then you see 19 pre-4th grade skills, so there's really 89. And this is how math cascades over time. So if we want students to succeed in algebra, for example, many schools will enroll them in an algebra course. The algebra course will focus on the 52 skills at the top of each column, at the top of that column. But the reality is that many of these students have predecessor gaps that they should have learned in 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade that are required for them to actually successfully access algebra skills. So there's really 147. And so the question is, how do we think about these sorts of mathematical relationships when addressing learning loss? Now, what happens in most schools today, in fact, almost every school, is instruction is focused on what we would say is the top of the column. The 4th grade teacher is going to have a set of 4th grade textbooks and teach the 42 4th grade skills. The 5th grade teacher will have a set of textbooks and teach the 45th grade skills, and so on and so forth. So instruction is focused at the top of the column, but students, as we know, even in the example Scott gave in Ector County, if they're coming in with all of these gaps, their ability to succeed with grade level content is limited because of these foundational gaps. And what ends up happening, and we wrote extensively about this in a report called The Iceberg Problem, is when kids walk into math, max in middle school behind, and they are then given an exclusive dose of grade level material, they tend to fall further behind. And this is frankly the risk in what some are calling a second wave of learning loss. Yes, schools will be fully back and I know in many cases they already are in Texas, and all kids hopefully will be back. But if students continue to be exposed exclusively to grade level material and they can't access it, they will fall further behind much more quietly than is happening now, but no less dangerously. Because what ultimately happens is, if you think of this in a particular class, the students who walks into the 6th grade will learn a number of those 6th grade skills, but will also have some unfinished learning from the 6th grade as well. Then they get to the 7th grade and they learn some 7th grade skills, but all of that unfinished learning is now going to accumulate below the surface. We can't see this because it's not showing up on the STAR assessment, because the STAR assessment is only focused on the grade level material, but all of this unfinished learning is accumulating, and then the same thing happens in the 8th grade. This is what we call the report the iceberg problem, because we can only see what's above the surface, the STAR assessment, for example, but all this unfinished learning is accumulating below the surface. Now, there's national data to support this as well. So if we look at NAEP data, but we go back and we say, how did 4th graders do in 2015 across the country? The answer is 40% of them were proficient. When that same cohort became 8th graders in 2019, 34% were proficient. This drop from 4th to 8th grade is true in every single state in the country. It is not necessarily true in reading. In reading, sometimes 8th graders go higher than 4th grade, sometimes lower, but in math, in 50 out of 50 states, it's lower. And in Texas, it's especially low. 44% of 4th graders were proficient on the NAEP in 2015. That dropped down to 30% of 8th graders in 2019. So math is different. Math is different, and these predecessor skills really matter in order to enable kids to accelerate. What we are focused on with our partner schools is a concept that we call tailored acceleration. That we know there'll be some kids who are on the grade level and they can do fine with 5th grade material in 5th grade and the 6th grade material in 6th grade, but there will be some who come in behind. And what those students need is a mix, a strategic mix of pre-grade, on-grade, and in some cases post-grade skills that all can get them to proficiency in 1, 2, or 3 years. That is the philosophy of tailored acceleration. And there are 3 key components to enabling tailored acceleration. The first is a precise understanding of each student's starting point. So in this case, what matters is not necessarily, let's say there's a 7th grade teacher. We don't necessarily care about how kids did on the 6th grade test, the 46 skills at the top of the 6th grade column. What the 7th grade teacher really needs to know is what are the gaps that students have that relate to 7th grade that they should have learned in 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, or 6th grade. We call this assessments on the column. So the grade level relevant skills and predecessor skills. We have a free offering called Teach to One Roadmaps Free that will allow any teacher, any class, any parent to actually learn about what their discrete grade level related gaps are. It is a 3-part diagnostic assessment. Each part can be taken in roughly 30 minutes. And the end result of that assessment is what's called your roadmap. So in this case, you see that the 7th grade students hadn't learned any skills from 7th grade. That's not surprising. Actually had a couple of 6th grade relevant skills, but for the most part had a lot of gaps from the 6th grade, and same in 5th and a little bit less in 4th. And then what you can see, the teacher can see, are the precise skills that the student still needs to master in order to achieve grade level proficiency. In this case, the student must master 87 skills to get to grade level proficiency, and that includes a set of pre-grade and on-grade skills in order to get there. So this, again, is totally free. Any school can use it, any parent can use it to see exactly what that precise roadmap looks like. The second component to enabling tailored acceleration is a plan, a personalized plan that includes the destination, a time frame, and a program. So if we think for a moment about this student, what a teacher may say is, wow, this one student has a whole bunch of skills to learn in a single year. We can try, but that might be too much to learn in one single school year. The odds are very low that that student will be able to learn all of that in 1 year. What if instead we had this student work on the algebra column for 2 years? as opposed to the 7th grade column for 1 year. That may be a more viable path for that one student that still gets them to proficiency, albeit on a different time frame. As you see, regardless of whether a student is on a 1-year plan, a 2-year plan, or a 3-year plan, they all get to proficiency, but they don't necessarily get there at the same time. And this is what's so critical for districts to understand. If all of your 6th grade students are going to, if the goal is to get them all to proficiency in 6th grade in 1 year, chances are a lot of them are not going to make it. Some of them may be better off going for 7th grade proficiency with a different course of study in 2 years than going for 6th grade in 1 year. And no matter whether they're on the 1-year plan, the 2-year plan, or the 3-year plan, each student gets a discrete mix of pre-grade, on-grade, and post-grade skills in order to make sure that they can get there. And then finally, we need regular measurements, regular assessments to measure progress. Is the student on the path? Again, state assessments don't do a great job at this because they're all focused on the top of the column. We have a number of mechanisms within roadmaps and our programs to make sure that teachers have that level of transparency. I'll show you a little bit about those in a moment. But the main question is the student on track to get to where she needs to be? So those are the components. Now, how do actually districts put this into action? We have a couple of tools. There are some schools that also do their homegrown versions of these, but if you're looking for some tools and models to support this, we'll show you a little bit about what we've developed. We have 2 primary solutions. One is called Teach to One Roadmaps Plus. That is an all digital curriculum. And then one is called Teach to One 360, which is a totally different innovative learning model. That's what we work with Scott in Ector County. And I'll give you an overview of each one, and I'll turn it back over to James. So Roadmaps Plus is an all digital curriculum. So it begins with the same concept. You get your roadmap. But then in addition to having the information about the roadmap, students are able to access content and assessments for each skill on their roadmap. So if I need to learn about how to compare fractions, I can access lessons from Khan Academy, from GeoGebra, from LearnZillion, from a whole bunch of different providers. I watch those lessons. Some are printable resources, some I can do with my family. When I think I know the skill, I can take a short form assessment. If I demonstrate I know that skill, it gets knocked off. I go to the next skill on my roadmap. So this is sort of a way for students to accelerate and address their learning gaps both at school and at home. Some schools use it for a homework solution as well. Here are the examples of the kinds of lessons that are already there waiting for students to access. So students pick the skill they want to work on, then they pick the lesson that they think will work best for them, and then they take the assessment. They don't do well on the assessment, no problem. They go back, watch another lesson, and then take the assessment again the next day. And then there's ample reporting for teachers and for administrators on exactly where each student is on their journey, on their particular roadmap. So that's Roadmaps Plus. And then for schools that, Roadmaps Plus is a phenomenal tool, but it really is more of a supplemental tool. For schools that really want to reimagine the classroom, to think differently about how do you organize learning around each and every student, that's where Teach to One 360 comes in. It can be done as a core math program or as a supplemental. And the way Teach to One 360 works is if you imagine you're in the 7th grade and you have reading first period in room 206, and you have PE second period in the gym, third period is time for math. And instead of walk into room 105, you walk into a big open space with lots of different stations. In some stations, kids work with teachers. In some stations, kids work with one another. In some stations, kids work independently. And when you walk in for math, you look up and you see a big TV monitor that looks like what you might see at the airport. And you see your name and you see which station you're supposed to go to. So you might spend the first 30 minutes working with the teacher in trinomials and 17 other students who need trinomials at that exact moment in time. And then you might spend the next 30 minutes in a peer-to-peer activity around trinomials. And then the last 10 minutes, you take an online assessment in trinomials, and then you're off to science class. That's the entire student experience. What we then on the back end do is create a new schedule for you for the next day based on how you did the previous day. So we make about 10,000 lessons, schedules every single day to make sure that we're figuring out what is the optimal lesson for every student every day, and how are the teachers and how is the space sort of organized in order to enable that level of personalization to happen. So those are the 2 solutions: Teach to One Roadmaps Plus, that's $15 a year, per student, and then Teach to One 360, which is more of a custom pricing depending on whether you're doing it as a core or a supplemental program with extensive professional development and supports for teachers. And I know James has put together a panel of teachers and some of our coaches to help explain how that works. So I'll turn it back over to you, James.
Thank you, Joel, and thank you, Dr. Muri. On today's panel, we have Jennifer Hernandez. She's a 6th grade math teacher at Bowie Middle School in Ector County. We also have Andrea Messick, who is Ector County's blended and personalized learning coordinator. And we're also joined by Sarah Towler, who is Teach to One Director of Instructional Support. So we're going to start with Jennifer, asking her a few questions. So Jennifer, what did the Teach to One model look like in your classroom before the pandemic? And how have you maintained Teach to One's personalized approach even during the pandemic?
Okay, so the Teach to One program pretty much in my classroom. Oh, sorry, that's the bell. I'm at school. So the Teach to One program, it was it is still a very active form of learning. So going back to Joel, what he was talking about with the Teach to One 360, we, however, don't have a walls down space. We didn't have that, so we have a walls up space. So what we would do, we don't have that open space where everybody is, but what we did back then, we had our students go to their main classroom. It's called an MA. That's our homeroom classroom. Then after that, they would be able to locate their schedules, and then they go off to their specific stations. And just like he said, for us, it was a very active form of learning because these kids are seeing things different every day. So maybe today they go into their first session and it's peer-led. And then they go to their second session and now it's teacher-led or it's independent. So the kids are very active in their learning in that sense, just because it's a variety. But that doesn't take away from the structure of things, though. It's still very structured because every day the kids understand they have to do session 1, session 2, and then they take their exit slip, which is pretty much an assessment of how their sessions went. So if today somebody had a peer-led instruction and it didn't go too well on their exit slip, then maybe tomorrow they'll work independently and we'll see how that goes for them, still on the same skill. So I did see a lot of engagement and the kids really taking ownership of their own education.
Awesome. Thanks for that.
Yes. And I don't think I answered how have we maintained that level of personalization. Yep. So now that we are in a pandemic, we see a lot less movement. And well, I don't have to explain why, but we see a lot of less movement. So with that, we're still very personalized. It has not taken away from that because instead of going from room to room, station to station, we implement those in one classroom. So now my homeroom stays with me for the entire time they have me. However, they still go to their sessions. Their learning is still personalized. They're still taking that daily exit slip. So now my job is the next day, how can I teach it differently if this specific group of students did not grasp it how I taught it today?
Very helpful. And to that end, how has Teach to One made your teaching practices more effective? And how has Teach to One kind of empowered you and your colleagues?
It has definitely made it more effective because we truly know what data-driven instruction is now. So before, it was words we heard, but with Teach to One today, we have that data in our fingertips every single day. These kids, they're taking their exit slip every single day. We can see, I don't even have to wait 5 seconds afterwards. I hit that results page on our teacher portal and I know how that kid did 5 seconds ago. So that's very, very helpful. So that has empowered us dramatically because now that data-driven instruction is pretty much, the data is working on itself. We can truly focus on the teaching aspect of it, of the delivery. How do I plan this lesson to really target, the majority of my students that are in my LIN? Because we have to understand we still have, I'm using the TTO term like everybody knows it, but we have our live investigations. Those are the teacher-led. And then we still have a small group of students that don't require to be with me that day. They're doing their independent. So that data-driven instruction really helps me, and that all that data helps me. Who do I need to focus on today? So that has really empowered us as teachers,
Great.
I believe.
So can you describe the students' experience with Teach to One, and what do your students enjoy most about Teach to One? And the level of classroom the level of classroom engagement, has that shifted as well?
Yeah, so what I really like about the Teach to One program and my students, this is what I see that they like the most, is how it's set up for them. So pretty much, they have the exit slip colors are main thing. If they don't do too well, they get a red. If they pass it, they get a sparkly green. That means they scored. It was a perfect score. So it's what they like. It's so student centered. So it's really tailored to what an 11-year-old wants to see. They have points that they need to reach by the end of the round. So all of these things, they like to feel like, hey, I did it. I learned this skill. And then they get to track their tries. So for example, if they're on their second try, they're feeling a little discouraged, then they get that sparkle green. You can see their excitement in their face. And once again, it leads to them taking ownership of their own learning. They're tracking their own growth with this. So that's what I'm seeing that they really like. I see hands raised. Hey, I got a sparkle today. Oh, I didn't do too good. I got a yellow. So all those things, just them really noticing and tracking their growth really helps. And it has, that when you asked me about the classroom
Right.
engagement, so engaged just because they want to do so good and they want to get that sparkle green today.
Well, I really appreciate you answering those questions and sharing, your experience from the teacher perspective. So thanks again, Jennifer.
Thank you.
So now we're joined by Andrea. Hi, Andrea.
Hello, how are you?
Great. So now we'd like to get just from the district perspective. So could you tell us more about your district's commitment to blended learning and innovation and what that means for your role?
So blended learning is a part of our district's strategic plan. And with that, the blended learning coordinator position was created. So in this position, I do manage the MIS grant for our district, as well as some other blended learning grants. I also serve as support to multiple campuses, but with our MIS grant and Teach to One, I'm able to get into those classrooms, coach teachers, and also coach administrators and instructional specialists. So maybe a principal may go into a class and not see the same thing that I see, maybe because the teacher is on point every time that principal walks in. And maybe whenever I walk in, I catch something different that they've not picked up on. So I'm able to, on the spot, coach that teacher, and then also meet with the administrators and kind of serve as a bridge between the campus and then the district level leadership, and then also with our Teach to One support.
Great. What is the biggest difference you see between Teach to One and other blended learning resources in the field?
So with Teach to One, everything truly is personalized and everything is updated daily for students. As long as the student is taking that exit slip daily, then every night their teacher gets a new lesson for that student for the next day. So everything shuts down in the evening, but then the teacher is able to log in and see exactly what they'll be teaching the next day. So if I am struggling with something specific, as long as I take that exit slip and I show whether I've mastered that or not, then my pathway the next day is truly personalized to only what I need. So it's true one-to-one instruction, and it's updated constantly. So whereas other blended learning models, you may need to wait for different assessment data to come through, this is just happening every day behind the scenes. And then the map data also goes in and helps to personalize those pathways as well.
Got it. Thank you for that. So what would be your piece of change management advice when districts are looking to adopt a new innovative learning model?
So as with any blended learning initiative, you've got to have power players with an innovative mindset. You can't go into blended learning or anything with Teach to One with that idea of what we've always done, we can keep on doing. You've got to really be willing to switch it up and think outside of the box. You've got to be willing to educate every single child and really personalize to what that child needs. Like Dr. Muri had mentioned with our at-risk learners, we want to make sure that everybody is reached, and Teach to One is the perfect way to do that.
Thank you so much, Ms. Messick, for providing the district point of view with Teach to One. I appreciate that. All right, now we're joined by Sarah Towler. Excited to hear more about these kind of the supports that Teach to One offers. So can you tell us about the level of implementation support that Teach to One provides?
Sure, James. Thank you for asking. We begin our partnership by meeting with leaders, listening to them, hearing what their vision is for their school so that we can incorporate our Teach to One aspects to fit their vision in their school. We are different than most models because we actually provide human capital to help support operations as well as instruction. So when schools are thinking about schedules, when they're thinking about space, when they're looking at their computers, we are there to help them all along the way. We have experts in the field that have been coaches and principals who have worked on school improvement efforts. So we're able to be thought partners. What does it mean for change management? What needs to be done? What do we need for data? What do those conversations look like? So all along the way, we are thought partners with the district. We meet regularly. We make sure that their needs are met. Even just a couple days ago, Andrea asked me, can you do a video for our parents to understand Teach to One? Sure. So we support to make sure that students are successful in every aspect, to make sure that our professional learning communities, we sit in on them each week, or even sometimes we have schools that we meet 3 to 4 times a week. And we're able to help guide those conversations that need to be had between teachers to make sure that best practices are implemented in our Teach to One program. So very different. And when I was a principal in Comal County in Texas, I was given many times a program without the supports of people to go to. So Teach to One does provide people all along the way to help you so that you're not alone. And we want to ensure success and that students' needs are being met all along the way.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. I'd imagine it's been a difficult year for everyone across the country with the pandemic. Can you kind of describe how Teach to One has adjusted and helped with district needs during the pandemic?
Sure. Everybody has been faced with change. So from a moment's notice, we would find out that students would be quarantined or teachers would be sent home. We have been able to shift and to pivot to meet those needs in a day's notice. So students can still keep that learning going on. Last spring, when this first came about, when the pandemic first hit, we had schools that were closed minimum of 1 day. Learning still was able to be picked up at home. We were still able to have those virtual lessons. Teachers still were able to get on Zoom. Their portals, the students' portals, don't change at all. So if they leave and come back, they are able to pick up their learning just where they left off. So it has been really very helpful to our schools that they had Teach to One. Learning loss has been minimal because the learning hasn't been lost. That time has been still captured. We have helped Ector County in determining if a student goes home and they come back, what classroom will they be put in? How will they receive instruction? Their assessments still go on. So it's been very valuable to have Teach to One in those math classes. We've had teachers say very often that the math part of their day has been very seamless, whereas some of the other parts of the other content areas has been a little bit difficult. But not with Teach to One, math still goes on.
Thanks. Well, really appreciate you, Sarah, in providing that context. And thank you to Jennifer and Andrea as well. So now I'm going to go into the chat, and so I can answer any questions that have been in the chat. Please feel free to ask a question of any of our 5 presenters. So it looks like we have one in the chat for Jennifer.
Yes. Hello, Karen. So what kind of supports? So pretty much before we started this in the beginning of the school year last year. It was the beginning of 2019, 2020. And we got a very, very extensive, training before. I believe it was 4 days long. And they flew people out here to our school. We got this training pretty much explaining the teacher portal, the student portal. Where can we find all the resources? Because when we get our schedules, the evening before, it comes with a bunch of resources that we need to be able to plan our lessons for the next day. The planning goes pretty seamlessly because of so many resources that are provided to us. So yes, I do feel that we got extensive training to go ahead and get this program started and growing. So it was very good.
So I will ask a question to Joel. Joel, are you there? Are learning skills tied to the CCSS?
Yes, and they're tied to different state standards as well. So we initially took the Common Core standards. We then had to break them up into a smaller grain size because if one of the standards says, for example, students will learn how to add, subtract, and multiply and divide fractions, that's not one, that's four. You really can't teach all four of those in a single session. So we had to break them up into a smaller grain size, and then we're able to crosswalk that unique skill map to different states, which is how we work with Scott and Ector County, so the teachers can see exactly what skills are included, which is almost all of them. And if there are some that are not, there are a handful that aren't, we have a way of sort of supplementing with the teachers to enable those additional skills to be covered.
Great. Thanks for that. So Dr. Muri, what is the biggest piece of advice you would give to a district that's thinking about doing something like this?
Yeah. The biggest piece, I think, is using the word journey. The implementation of anything new and different that is as substantive as this is a journey. And so be ready for the journey. There's excitement at the beginning, and then as you become, your teachers and administrators, become immersed. There are the challenges because of the change management process. It is different. It challenges, teachers to think differently about their craft. It challenges administrators to think differently about how they support teachers. And so, be ready. But I remember as an administrator looking at the first set of map data. It was after about 5 months of the implementation of the program and seeing the growth of children. You could see it in the teachers' eyes, how inspired they became because they knew that their work had made a significant difference in their kids. In fact, for many teachers, much more than ever before. They may have been a good teacher prior, but when they saw the power of personalizing for kids and what it can do, it was pretty amazing. But journey, it is a journey. Stick with it. Fidelity of implementation is critically important, and that divergent thinking, those change management skills. And then just that whole process of change management is pretty critical.
Thank you for that. And this last question, this could be for Sarah or Andrea or Jennifer. How would you recommend that we implement the collaborative aspect in a remote setting or when we need to socially distance and have low touch environments? So I'll open that up to any of you that were on the panel.
For the collaborative learning, what we tried doing, or breakout rooms would work very well in the remote learning world. Place your kids in a breakout room, and they can have their own collaborative learning there. Of course, when you're doing collaborative learning, instead of being a teacher, your hat has now changed to a support. Mm-hmm. So you're, I say walking around because I'm in the classroom, but you would, go from breakout room to breakout room, check up on them, answer misconceptions they may be having, things like that. So breakout rooms would be a great tool there.
Just add that we have some supports that we provide to teachers to help guide those questions, because many times peers are reluctant to talk about math with each other. So that's part of the training that we do, is to make sure that we help with those guiding questions so that they're more comfortable talking about math.
All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us today for this webinar. A big thank you to our presenters. We will be sending out the recording of this webinar to everyone immediately after this is over. And feel free to reach out to us at teachto1.org to schedule a meeting. But thanks again and really appreciate everyone.